Well, I think this is the session right after the lunchtime, so by the natural way, I'm afraid that some of you might be losing your interest, but I bet that the topic is really exciting and interesting. Particularly, it is closely related to the previous session from the Professor Fukuyama, where he raised very important points, and many of them are directly related to this topic for special session 1 about the skill, education, and HRD, kind of. So let me introduce myself briefly. I'm Bong Gun-jung, currently at the GSIS, Graduate School of International Studies at SNU. But until 3 years ago, I was working in the Korean Ministry of Education, and at that time I was at the Korean permanent delegation to the OECD in Paris, in charge of the education and social affairs. It was at that time I got very much friendly with these two beautiful ladies from OECD Paris. And Deborah Roseberry is the director of the skill development program in OECD now. And Miho is also working in that topic. So they are in companion, bringing you the beauty of the OECD works, OECD analysis. You'll see that in OECD, this is the privilege that they collect all the important data from all around the world, and they nicely analyze it, and they nicely put into a presentation format. And you'll see the beauty of OECD works, partly from their presentations. As you see from the pamphlet, Deborah is from New Zealand originally. She was working in the New Zealand Financial Ministry, and she spent decades in OECD headquarters in education and economic sector, and later on in charge of education. Well, having close cooperation with Deborah, I realized that she has brought in the economist way of understanding, way of viewing, way of analyzing the education affairs, and it was impressive to me because I was trained as an educationist and also kind of a socialist. And Miho is also from Japan, and she has been trained as a culturalist and educationist, and also partly in this economic-related topic of HR and skill, etc. She started his career at the UNESCO, and later on she was promoted to OECD to have a very important function in OECD education sector to relate education and economy. And I will later on introduce the two commentators for today. So without further delay, I'd like to ask Deborah to start the presentation. Be loud, please.
Thank you very much, and it's a very great pleasure to be here and to see so many of you here interested in what we have to present this afternoon. We're very excited to be able to present to you some key findings from our new survey of adult skills, and look at that from the point of view of the OECD skills strategy. And this is very exciting. It's a very new survey that was just published on the 8th of October. And I'm just going to give you a little taste of some of the results from the survey. And you can see here, this is a book that's available free to download from our OECD website, which is the OECD Skills Outlook 2013. And even this is just the first results from the Survey of Adult Skills, also sometimes known under the acronym of PIAAC. So I'm just going to give you a very small taste of some of the results from the survey. Okay, here is an outline of my presentation, and I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about the Survey of Adult Skills. So these are the countries. There are 24 countries participated in the first results of the Adult Skills Survey, and we have another 9 countries will be doing the survey with results published in 2016. this explains just a very little bit about how the survey was carried out. It's a household survey. We went and knocked on people's doors and asked them, at least 5,000 adults from 16 to 65 years old, interviewed and assessed in their own homes in each country. We surveyed almost 160,000 adults across the 24 countries or economies, and this represented, through a sampling process, 724 million adults. That's a lot of people. We asked them to answer a questionnaire about themselves, to provide a lot of information about their background. We asked them to provide information about the skills they use at work, and this is really first of its kind survey. And then we asked them to complete an internationally agreed assessment of their literacy, numeracy, and problem-solving in technology-rich environments skills. So here you can see, and I'm not going to go through them, these are the definitions of literacy, numeracy, and problem-solving in technology-rich environments. And there is an entire book explaining how each one of these skills is defined and assessed. Again, you can find that on our website. This just gives you a little snapshot of some of the questions and the way in which we go about assessing skills. So in this example, which is one of the literacy questions, it's asking people to look at these rules for preschool and say, what is the latest time that children should arrive at preschool? Now, somebody who is a very confident reader will read this very quickly and realize they only have to read the first bullet point and they can answer the question. You have to have your child there by 9 a.m. Okay? So one of the things that we can do is see how quickly people can answer these questions, which also tells us something about their literacy skills. Here's an example of numeracy. They're asked to read a thermometer and answer the question about if the temperature decreases by a certain amount, what temperature will be shown. And this is an example of problem solving in a technology-rich environment, asking them to look through for websites that, if they're looking for a job that doesn't require them to register or pay a fee, and bookmark them. And you can see bookmark is up there on the left. So someone who's confident in their problem-solving skills, knows their way around a website, will get there very quickly, and somebody else may take a lot longer or, in fact, not be able to do it at all. So that gives you an idea of the sorts of literacy, numeracy, problem-solving questions that we have assessed. Now what I'd like to do is just very, very quickly run through some of the key results for literacy, numeracy, and problem-solving, and so you can get a sense of what the survey shows. Well, we've organized the results according to levels of proficiency, because this makes it somewhat easier for us to explain that somebody at level 3 is able to do this, somebody at level 4 or 5, which is the top, can do other things, and some people have not even reached level 3. And the levels are defined in on our website and in our publication. It's a little bit technical, so I won't go through them. But you can see here, these are the people who have not reached level 3 literacy level. And you can see Korea is at about the average compared with other OECD countries. And here you can see these are the number on the right, the percentage of the population who are at level 3 or level 4 and 5. If we say how many does that mean in terms of the 724 million adults that this represents across the 24 countries and regions, you can see that there are only 85 million who are high skilled in literacy, that's at level 4 or level 5, and a lot of people in the sample who are at level 1 or below, more than 100 million. That's a lot of people. If we look at numeracy, again, looking at the number of people below level 3 in numeracy, you can see here Korea is quite a bit below the average, but most countries have significant numbers of the population who have not reached level 3. And you can see here are the people on the right again who have reached level 3 or level 4 or 5. Again, you can see this is what it translates through to in the millions of adults if you're thinking about what is the global skill base. And here is problem solving in technology-rich environments. And here we use a somewhat truncated scale, just from level 1 to level 3. But in fact, you can see that there's quite significant numbers, share of the population in all countries who have very, very limited problem solving in technology-rich environment skills. And this is perhaps one of the biggest surprises to us out of the survey is just how big the digital divide is. Here you can see on the right the people who have level 2 or level 3 proficiency in problem solving in a technology-rich environment. But perhaps one of the most significant findings is actually if you look at the share of the population in every country who are not able to use a computer at all. Those are the people in pink or purple, depending on how you see that color. And for, on average, that's quite a significant share of the population. In Korea, it's actually quite a high percentage of the population. So if you look at the number of people, number of participants who have either level 1 or below, 259 million people, or who failed the ICT core, or had no computer experience, you have another 113 million, and then there were an additional 72 million who actually said, no, I don't want to do a computer-based assessment at all. So that's quite a lot of people who don't have basic ICT skills in the 24 countries and regions that we surveyed. Now I want to show you the distribution of literacy proficiency scores within each country, because one of the big findings that we got out of the survey was to discover that the differences or the distribution of skills within each country is much, much larger than the differences between countries on the average. And so every single country has a significant share of the population who are low-skilled. If we look at the same distribution of numeracy proficiency scores, again, we see a very similar picture, that the distribution of numeracy skills within each country is very large indeed. Now I want to show you a little bit of some of the reasons for this variation. And one of the first things that, of course, we look at is how do skills vary according to age group. And here you can see we're comparing the average score on numeracy by age group. And if you look to the extreme right, you can see that Korea has had a dramatic improvement in the numeracy scores by age group, and that the youngest Koreans have much higher skills than older Koreans. Now, of course, this is just a cross-country snapshot. It's not telling us how the skills have evolved for a single person over their lifetime, but it is telling us that young Koreans have much higher skills on average than older Koreans. The same story, of course, we find with literacy. And I should point out that there's actually a strong correlation between somebody's literacy skills, their numeracy skills, and their problem-solving skills. Now I want to focus just a little bit more on the younger age group. And here we have the literacy skill levels for 16 to 24-year-olds. And you can see that Korea has very few people who have low literacy skills amongst the youth. That's a really good news story. It's not altogether surprising because this is a very similar picture to what we get in PISA, which our assessment of 15-year-olds. And Korea also has a high share of people with level 3 skills and level 4 and 5 skills. Although it's interesting if you compare Korea and Finland, for example, Finland has a higher share of people with top level 4 and level 5 skills than does Korea. Japan also has a higher share of people in that very top category. If we look at the relationship for young people between literacy and parents' education, we can see that for Korea, for young people whose parents did not have upper secondary school, they score lower than young people whose parents went through tertiary education. This is what we call the social gradient. And just so you can see, this is a very similar picture to what we see in Japan. The parental background matters less, though, than it does for Australia. And parental background matters about the same for the United States, but the overall level of skills is lower. I also now want to show you proficiency in problem solving in technology-rich environments, comparing young people and older adults. And here you can see Korea's young people, 16 to 24-year-olds, anyone in this group, comes out top with strong problem-solving skills. However, it's worth noting that even in Korea, more than 30% of young adults do not have at least level 2 skills in proficiency in problem solving. So it's not even all young people are super skilled in an ICT environment. Even there are some people who are left out, who are left behind. If we look at older adults, you can see, in fact, that very few 55 to 65-year-old Koreans can reach level 2, and we essentially couldn't find people at level 3 amongst the older age group. So that gives you a snapshot of what the proficiency and the results on the assessment are. Now I want to look at what does the survey tell us about developing skills. The OECD produced a skills strategy in 2012, which is a framework for looking at and analyzing how to develop skills systems for better economic and social outcomes. And this, we organize the OECD skills strategy around 3 pillars: developing relevant skills, activating skills supply, and putting skills to effective use. So this shows you developing skills is, of course, very much about encouraging and enabling people to learn throughout life. It's also about fostering international mobility of skilled people and promoting cross-border skills policies. If we're looking at activating skills supply, it's about encouraging people to offer their skills to the labour market and retaining skilled people in the labour market rather than having them exit. And for putting skills to effective use, it's about creating a better match between people's skills and the requirements of their job, but also over time and in a dynamic sense, increasing the demand for high-level skills, which are the path to prosperity. So what does the survey tell us about developing skills? Well, first of all, it tells us that education attainment matters. And this graph shows you the score point difference between, on average, those who have tertiary education compared to those who have that have less than upper secondary school education. Now, just to explain the difference between unadjusted and adjusted. Unadjusted is the raw data. The adjusted is the impact just of educational attainment once you hold a whole load of other factors constant. So here you can see it really does make a difference in all countries. This isn't a surprise. If we look at problem-solving proficiency by educational attainment, and this is for the whole population, we can see again that for those with below upper secondary education, they have a very low share of level 2 and level 3 skills. But you can see also that for Koreans with tertiary education, so higher education, again, relatively weak problem-solving proficiency across the OECD in comparison with other countries. This graph is looking at the 16 to 29-year-olds, and it looks at those with higher education, what we call tertiary type A, so that's bachelor's degrees and higher. And here you can see the distribution of literacy scores, the 25th percentile, the average, and the 75th percentile. And you can see here that the score for even the 75th percentile of Korean tertiary graduates in the 16 to 29-year-old age group actually is relatively low compared to the average, which is the red line, of tertiary graduates of this age group across all the countries sampled. If we now look at adult education and training, because one of the things which we asked people was about their participation in adult education and training, we can see a really marked pattern across all countries. Those who have already a high level of skills are much more likely to participate in further adult education and training. And you can see that for Korea, those who have only level 1 or below level 1 proficiency are much less likely to participate in further education compared to other countries, for example, Norway, Sweden, or the Netherlands, for example. And yet if you look at those who have level 4 or level 5 skills, you can see there's not much difference between Korea and the rest of the countries in the survey. If we look at just job-related adult education and training, we can see a similar pattern, but less participation overall. Now let's very quickly look at what the survey can tell us about activating the supply of skills. Who's participating, bringing their skills to the labor market? Well, this is a snapshot for Korea of participation in the labor market, those who are employed or unemployed, according to their literacy level. And what you can see, in fact, well, two very interesting things that you can see, is that the employment rate of those who have level 4 or level 5, so the top skill proficiency and literacy, is actually lower than the employment rate of those with only level 2. In fact, every other group. The other interesting thing which this graph shows is that the share of the unemployed is actually higher amongst the higher skilled. That's a very different pattern from what we see across the survey overall, where we can see that the higher the skill level, the more likely people are to be employed, and the less likely they are to be unemployed. So this is a very interesting pattern that we can see for Korea, which is quite different from the survey overall and from what we see in many countries. Let's probe that a little bit. This is showing the share of men with literacy levels 3, 4, or 5. And you can see that those who are in the labor force, whether they're employed or unemployed, that less than 50% of those in the labor force in Korea have level 3, 4, or 5. Okay? You can see there's a pretty systematic pattern across countries that those who are outside the labor force are lower skilled, with the exception there of the Czech Republic. That's the pattern for men. If we look at the pattern for women, you can see for most countries there's a very similar pattern, that those who are in the labor force have a higher skill level on average than those outside the labor force, except for Korea and the Czech Republic. So outside the labor force is a whole pool of women with high levels of literacy. That's an important skill potential that's currently not being utilized. This is just showing the same point in a different way, which is showing that that education and literacy makes a big difference to participation in the labor market in most countries, but not in Korea. Now let me just very quickly look at what the survey tells us about utilizing skills. Well, the first thing is to note that if we look at the pattern of jobs across the countries surveyed, we can see that Korea actually still has quite a large share of jobs, one of the largest shares of jobs, that actually don't require anything more than primary education. But it also has a quite high share, one of the highest shares, of jobs requiring tertiary education or more. So what you can see is quite a polarized job market or job distribution. One of the things that's very important about the utilization of skills is that the economic situation and the types of skills that people need are actually changing quite dramatically. And this is the share of workers who reported, this actually comes from another survey, not from our own, though it is published in our survey, which shows the share of workers who reported substantial restructuring or reorganization in their current workplace during the previous 3 years that affected their work. And you can see that for Korea, for example, nearly 40% of workers were in a situation where their workplace substantially changed in ways that affected their work. That's a very demanding and dynamic and changing workplace, and raises the question about what skills for adaptability is Korea developing and fostering. If we look at introduction of new processes and technologies, we can see a very similar picture, that many workplaces are changing dramatically and rapidly. One of the things that I said at the outset, the survey asked participants to tell us about how they use skills at work. And this is a graph looking at the average use of information processing, so literacy, numeracy, and problem-solving skills at work. And you can see there's quite a difference here. People in Korea are doing a lot of writing at work, using ICT at work quite a lot, but not actually using problem-solving very much. If we look at a comparison, this shows you how Korea compares with the United States, Japan, and Germany. And perhaps the key feature that comes out here is that Koreans aren't using problem-solving very much in the workplace, a lot less than the average across countries surveyed, a lot less than Germany, though even Germany is below the average, and dramatically less than the United States. So this is raises a real question mark about how effectively Korea is utilizing the skills that it has. We also asked participants about the use of some generic skills at work, things like task discretion, learning on the job, influencing others, cooperative work, self-organizing, and so forth. And again, you can see the comparison in the use of skills across the workplace. And you can see in particular, for example, that in Korea, cooperative skills are not being used as much in the Korean workplace as they are on average, and certainly less than the United States. So this is very new analysis for us, and we plan to do a lot more digging into the use of skills at work. I do just want to show you how the use of information processing skills at work varies by the size of the workplace, because this is a real issue for the contrast between small and medium enterprises and larger establishments. And larger establishments seem to be much more effective at utilizing skills in the workplace, particularly ICT skills and problem-solving skills. Now, one of the big questions around effective skill utilization is about overqualification and underqualification, and this has been a big topic in Korea. And you can see that in most countries, in fact, there is an issue around people being apparently overqualified for their job. And Korea is actually marginally below the average for the survey in terms of the number of people who are overqualified for their job. Nevertheless, you can see that it's actually between 20 and 25% of the workforce. If we look at the share of workers whose literacy level is more or less than what is required by their job, we can see that in Korea, very few people have lower literacy than what is required by their job. If we look at how many are, by this definition, overskilled, however, you can see that there's more than 10% of Koreans who have skills that are going to waste in the workforce, in the workplace at the moment. So a real challenge is how to use those skills more effectively. Let me very quickly just give you a taste of what these results might mean for policy. And this now is looking across the whole survey. Clearly, the survey shows that skills do have a major impact on each individual's life chances. And those with low skills are increasingly likely to be left behind. Skills matter for countries' competitiveness, and an inequality in skills is associated with inequality in income. We also, though I haven't spoken about it, are able to show how lower skills are correlated with poorer health, lower civic engagement, and less trust. It shows us that for developing skills, obviously the level and the distribution of skills differs markedly across countries, and yet most of the variation is within countries. The social background has a strong impact on skills in some countries, but other countries it has less impact. We can see, though I haven't shown it, foreign language immigrants with low levels of education tend to have low skills, and that it's not just a matter of time for successful integration. And some countries have made much more progress in improving skills efficiency than others. We also know from the survey that much of learning takes place outside formal education. We see that proficiency levels are closely related to age, and that there's a strong positive relationship between participation in adult education, or if you prefer, lifelong learning, and skills proficiency. So those who are already weak have a much more difficult time to actually improve their skills through adult education and training. And using skills outside of work is also closely related to proficiency. On activating the supplier's skills, well, we do see that unused skills can become obsolete, that those in general with low literacy proficiency are less likely to be employed. Some countries make greater economic use of their highly skilled talent pool than others, particularly their women, and many adults with low skills are outside the workforce. We also know that earnings increase with proficiency. For putting skills to more effective use, we know that skills will only translate into better economic and social outcomes if they're used effectively. And we know also that using skills at work is very closely linked to labor productivity. Some skills mismatch is inevitable and even positive for the economy in a dynamic sense. But in most countries, more could be done to address the match between demand and supply of skills. We know that underskilling, underuse of skills, and unemployment can also reflect lack of information and transparency, or geographical constraints, and that linking skills with broader economic development strategies can help countries move towards greater skills-driven prosperity. As I said, I've only just given you a little taste of the results of the survey. If you go to skills.oecd.org/skillsoutlook/HTM, you can download the first results. You can also find data analysis tools that will enable you to compare different countries across different dimensions. So please do go and explore our website. And if you want to know more about the OECD's work on skills more generally, then just skills.oecd.org. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deborah. Actually, hers is really full of very much important policy implications for the Korea and the other OECD member countries. So we'll have Miho's presentation that is focusing on Korean case. So I guess that a lot of questions, objections, and comments are coming in your mind, but let me postpone them until the Q&A session for this last moment. Okay, Miho.
Okay, thank you. 안녕하세요, and it's an honor for me to share our preliminary findings of the skills strategy for Korea. As the moderator introduced, that I would like to share with you the preliminary findings drawing on the generic findings from PIAAC, but focusing on Korea. So we will present our findings by the framework Deborah just introduced. We have 3 pillars: developing relevant skills, activating skilled supply, and putting skills to effective use. Among the many challenges we have found, we would like to present 3 key challenges for each pillar. So we will begin with the first pillar, the developing relevant skills. We have identified the key 3 challenges for the Korean effective policy implementation. One is the overemphasis on academic studies and higher education. The second is entrepreneurship, which was well discussed in the plenary session this morning. And the third one is lifelong learning, as Deborah mentioned, but in particular with certain groups. One is older workers, and second is low-skilled workers, and 3 is women. And let us present some of the facts. And these preliminary findings were actually formulated by 2 sources of information. One is desk-based research, including literature, as well as the OECD big data, like adult survey, PIAAC. The second is the fact-finding mission, which was conducted in August. We met with key persons in Korea, and we gathered rather qualitative information from the key stakeholders as well. But here I would like to present some key facts based on the data. So in Korea, we can see much more students go to academic track than in the past, and you can see that the percentage of entry rates into tertiary type A is academic track has increased from 2000 to 2011 from about a little over 40 to about little less than 70%. So more people go to academic in comparison to the vocational tertiary education. So much less students now go to vocational track. So there are 2 dichotomy for tertiary education in Korea. And this poses some possible equity issue when the academic culture is so much valued, especially in countries like Korea, where parents invest in education in addition to public spending. So one of the key challenges could include that for ensuring equity in the process of skills formation is important, in particular in early ages. However, in Korea, financial burden is so much on households, and it's considerably high for early education in Korea. And you can see 3 graphs. On the left, this is for primary education, and you can see the proportion of household spending in comparison to public spending. And the second column is for primary, secondary, and post-secondary education. And the third one is tertiary education. And you can see that the proportion is among the highest in Korea. The household spending is color in red. So this poses a question about equity, because well-off family can invest more in education. Now, let us look at some examples for the second challenge, which is fostering entrepreneurship for building creative economy. And this graph shows on the vertical, this shows the image of entrepreneurs in society is whether favorable or less favorable on the vertical. On the horizontal, it shows whether the school actually help in understanding the role of entrepreneurs in society. So the respondents said more than half the respondents think school actually help in understanding the role of entrepreneurs in society. It's not necessarily doing it, but raising the awareness of the importance. And in Korea, close to the 60% of the respondents said yes. However, on the vertical side, the image of entrepreneurs in society is less favorable compared to that in other countries. So this is pretty much in line with what Mr. Sagog said in the morning. And let us look at the actual teaching. And again, according to the survey, less than half the respondents think schools actually provide enabling skills or know-how to run a business. Now, let us hear from the students themselves, not the respondents, adults or parents. And this is from the PISA data, which is measuring the 15-year-old students. And much fewer 15-year-old students in Korea think school can actually be helpful for their jobs in the future or making decisions compared to their international peers. And you can see that the triangle is whether the school has taught me things which could be useful for a job. You can see it's much lower than the rest of the countries. And the box shows whether the school actually helped them to give confidence in making decisions. Again, this is much lower than the rest of the countries. Now let us look at some examples about low participation in lifelong learning among certain groups. And this shows how much hours the participants take in lifelong learning. And if you see bar on the right side, that shows the group takes more hours compared to the whole population. And if you see a bar on the left side, they spend fewer hours than the whole population. So on the right side, we can see that the Korean working age group of 25-year-olds to 34 actually spends much more hours in job-related non-formal education than the whole population. So the young people actually invest more by learning. And also, if we compare that with the international average, we can also see that the young people also spend much more hours than their international peers. But how about the older group, which is in blue? In contrast, older workers participate much fewer hours compared to the whole population within the country, as well as compared to the international average too. And also, the issue includes that those who need it the most receive the least, which was well pointed out by Deborah's findings as well. And if we look at the groups, rather below the average, the below level 1 or below level 1 or level 1 or level 2, you can see that in Korea that these people invest less than the international average in job-related adult education and training. And how about gender? Well, women participate less than men in any age groups, as you can see, and the gap is the largest in younger groups. But if we look at the group who actually participate in lifelong learning, then the graph gives us a little different picture. So when they actually participate, the women participate more hours than men in the group between 34-year-old and 45-year-old. So with the closer look, it really reveals much more facts than just scratching the surface of the data. Now let us look at the pillar 2. And we have 3 groups as concerned groups. One is women, and second is youth, and third is older workers. About the women, as Deborah already pointed out, in Korea, we observe the gender gap in labor force participation in Korea. And that gap is among the largest in OECD countries. And that lack of incentives for women to participate in labor force also include lack of career opportunities, as well as income gap, in particular for women with children. So you can see that the managerial positioning being held by women in Korea is about 8 to 10%, whereas the OECD average is 29%. And if we compare the gender pay gap among full-time workers, in Korea, it's 38 to 39% in comparison to the OECD average of 16%. And we don't have the average for the OECD. However, within the Korean data, we can see that the gender gap of female workers with children even are more disadvantaged because the gap is 46%. Now for the pillar 2, the youth. The transition from school to work is a big issue in Korea. And if we look at the NEET population, not in education or training, then yes, the average is slightly above the international average. But if we look at the qualification levels, then the share of youth in NEET group is much, much higher than the OECD average. It's close to 25%. So this is really a loss of human capital to improve labor productivity in Korea, in addition to women, which I mentioned before. The last group is the older workers. And if we look at the projection of the aging, you can see that we are around 2014 now, and that aging rate becomes steeper from now on. That really gives us some implications to think. First, the government cannot afford to lose the income from the youth people. So they need to become taxpayers rather than in need or on social spending. And also that the old people, they need to be self-sufficient. They cannot depend on social spending too much in addition to pension system, which is increasing. So older workers are, in general, with lower qualification levels than the population in Korea, as Deborah pointed out already. So we really need to make sure that the older people with lower skilled are going to be given opportunities for upskilling and retain in the labor force. Now let us move on to the third pillar, which is using skills effectively. And there are 3 issues. One is skills mismatch. The next is lack of quality jobs. And 3 is identify and forecasting skills need. The first, skills mismatch. Well, Deborah already explained, but overqualification is an issue in Korea. We can see that the average of the underqualification is below the average, whereas overqualification is slightly below the average overqualification. And qualifications and actual skills are not necessarily the same. They overlap to some extent. So we also looked at over-skilling and under-skilling. And again, we could see that over-skilling is also an issue in Korea. And why is this an issue? Because overqualification or over-skilling has a strong negative effect on real hourly wages. And in case of Korea, the overqualified earn 18% less than well-matched workers with the same qualification. In general, the average is 13%, but 18% is among the highest among the countries with available data. Sorry. The second is lack of quality jobs. So the ways to think about this is when the skills workforce is highly qualified, we need high quality jobs too. So in general, the average scores in literacy higher among the employed than among the unemployed and the inactive. So this is the OECD average. You can see beautiful cascading from the employed, unemployed, and out of the labor force, whereas in Korea, the picture looks quite different. So in Korea, the unemployed and the inactive scored higher than the employed. And there are possibly 3 reasons. One is because of the high index of unemployed among high qualified youth, which has been already discussed. And second possible reason is that unemployed may perform well on literacy, numeracy, and problem-solving skills. However, they may not be necessarily performing well on job-specific proficiency of job-searching skills. And the third possible reason is about the inactive labor force, which was already well pointed out by Deborah. It's about women. Some of the inactive may be voluntary and temporary, such as women who are taking care of their families, parents, or their children. And if we look at the young people, and one of the reasons why they changed their first job, actually the biggest response was about unsatisfying working conditions. Yes, in reality, 1 in 4 jobs are found to be low-paid work in Korea, and that index is the highest in OECD countries. And 1 in 4 jobs are found to be temporary employment, and the proportion is, again, among the highest in the OECD countries. And in Korea, once you start with a temporary job, it is very difficult to get out of that situation, get a permanent position. And you can see that they transition from temporary to permanent after 3 years of working. The probability is the lowest, the proportion is the lowest in Korea for the people who move from temporary job to a permanent position. It's not about the financial incentives, but also working conditions include the coverage of social insurance. And you can see that all of the pension, health insurance, and employment insurance, they are much less than for non-regular or temporary workers compared to the regular workers. And also, those with low qualifications are more likely to be in non-regular jobs. And also, more women are found to be in non-regular jobs. This raises, again, the issue for gender. And also, as Deborah talked about, the size of enterprises matter as well. So more workers with non-regular jobs are found in small and medium-sized enterprises. So the third challenge of the third pillar is identifying and forecasting skills needs. And this is an issue not only for Korea, but for all OECD countries. And if we look at wages in the service sector is on the decline, in particular in recent years with a sharp decline. However, from the overall perspective, the service sector is one of the key sectors for the Korean economies. Because Korea's service sector is relatively small and has low productivity compared to the OECD average. So this is a sector to improve for better labor productivity, whereas the challenge is, as we have seen, the wages are on decline. This is really a challenge to solve. Now, I introduced some of the key challenges, but in order to tackle these challenges, we really need to look at the enabling conditions as a whole, as a system, so 3 pillars all at the same time. In doing so, what are the key challenges? The first is addressing the overarching and systemic challenges. which requires policy coherence and interlinkages among 3 pillars. Policy coherence across different ministries. For example, all of the challenges I mentioned could be related to not only education and training policy, but also labor market policy, social policy, tax policy, and to some extent, I didn't talk about the immigration, but immigration could bring high skilled. In that case, the immigration policy could be part of the policy package. The second is bringing together stakeholders for whole of government and whole of society commitment to skills. Because policies, the well-designed policies, can be a failure when it is not well implemented. So for an effective implementation, you need a strong buy-in and commitment from the stakeholders who are to implement the policy. So it is very important to bring together the key stakeholders, which we will do tomorrow, which I will introduce at the end of my presentation. And the third challenge is coordinating national and local concerns. And who is responsible for what? Because at the end, skills are very locally owned and locally developed. So it's very important to coordinate national and local policies for the effective skills strategy and systems. So these are the overview, again, the surface of all of our analysis, and what is the next step? We will actually meet tomorrow, conduct a national diagnostic workshop with the key stakeholders, which I mentioned just now, and we would like to have a fruitful discussion on implementation challenges and effective actions, not about design of policy, but actual challenges on the ground. And we invite Korean participants and who are key stakeholders in key institutions, and they provide internal insights and their analysis, as well as domestic data and research in an interactive and dynamic way with us. And the OECD, we try to provide our international comparative data and our third person's neutral, objective, evidence-based analysis, and we will have this dialogue, and we incorporate these real dialogues into further our analysis, and we will deliver a final report the end of February next year. This will be our strategic assessment of Korea's current national skills system, and we very much welcome your views on our preliminary analysis as well. If you have comments, please do bring your comments to Mr. Choi. Yes, so this is the end of my presentation, and we very much look forward to working with you in this room as an audience, as a key stakeholders. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Miho. We have another packet of questions and comments there, I know, but this time I will be very much ruthless to my male counterparts. That you have 3 minutes each. Professor Bae and Dr. Che, you are given 3 minutes to comment on two presentations, so please make it as short as possible. Okay, who will go first? Dr. Che or Professor Bae? Okay, Professor Che from Korea. He got his doctoral in economics from Korea and has been working in Korea for a long time, specialized in labor market analysis and labor economics, also spent some years in Bangkok UNESCO office. Dr. Che?
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much, Deborah and Miho, for your excellent and very, very informative presentations. And I believe that all of us in this room are very, in some sense, shocked by the very striking findings you showed. about Korea's current skills system. That is, sometimes Koreans have been bolstering, that is, Korea's rapid economic success have been possible due to the, let's say, well-established human resource development system in Korea. But as you see, there exist so many serious and formidable challenges. So then my comment is not just a comment to the presentations made by Deborah and Miho. Instead, I just introduced some backgrounds of this skills review of OECD and some points I would like to invite you to consider during the next forthcoming discussion. First of all, this OECD skills strategy review, OECD's review on Korea's skills system is based on the mutual agreement between the Korean government, Korean Ministry of Education, and OECD to identify, to examine the current Korea's skills system and to identify serious challenges we need to overcome if we are going to pursue the, let's say, sustained economic and social development. And I believe that this review is quite timely. That is, this year is the first year of the new government, new administration of Park Geun-hye government. And each ministry is rolling out their own new plans or initiatives. Of course, these plans or initiatives have been reviewed or checked by individual ministries, but there have been, as I know, there have been little chances for overall or comprehensive review or reflection on the congruency or consistency of these various kinds of policies or plans. Then through this review, I believe that we will have the opportunity to review these plans or initiatives from more comprehensive perspective and the results, and in the end, we'll be able to have more concrete, more relevant and consistent government policies. And I have two things I would like to mention. First, that is, how can I say, inequality of skills or skills by different age groups. That is, as you can see from the presentations of Deborah and Miho, old workers are having relatively low level of skills, while young generations are having a relatively high level of skills. First of all, this kind of imbalance or inequality of skills, I believe that this is the basic underlying reason of current so-called serious labor market polarization. That is, old workers with a relatively low level of skills are forced to take low-paid jobs under the less or underdeveloped social system in Korea. And so this inequality of skills should be very carefully taken into account when we are discussing about policy measures to address the income or labor market inequality. And one more thing I would like to mention is that this kind of inequality is not just a matter, is not just something happened in the past. That is, this kind of inequality can happen in the future for young generations. That is, you should keep in mind that this kind of skills inequality has happened along with the rapid changes of the economic or industrial structure of Korean economy. That is, the skills demands from the industry side has changed quite rapidly. then the skills that which is owned by older generations has quite rapidly get obsolete. Then, if there's no suitable lifelong learning system which is accessible to everyone, then such situation can repeat once again for young generations. That is, if young generations do not spend time to upgrade or update their skills in the future, they will face the same situation that old workers are facing now.
Thank you, Dr. Che,
Yeah.
for your contribution
Sorry,
of
that-
valuable addition
Yeah.
to the OECD findings. And let me confess to you that I made a plot that we need to encroach your tea time if you need more time. So, Professor Baer, you have 3 minutes, sharp.
Okay, I can do that in 3 minutes. First of all, thank Deborah and Miho for great and wonderful and insightful presentation. Watching or looking at your presentation, I had quite a lot of questions and comments, but I'd like to make 3 points. First of all, when looking at your presentation, I realized that, as Miho said, linkage is important among 3 pillars. Among 3, I like to mostly point out that connection between developing skill and activating skill. Korea is well known to be stronger in terms of educational achievement, and also, for example, ICT, in terms of ICT. But as you found, we may have a great access to information or technology, but we may fail to effectively use that kind of skill in their career or job. So is common pattern across the nation or unique in Korean case? That is my one question. Second one is, as Dr. Che suggested, it is quite impressed to see skill gap between generation, given Korea is increasingly becoming aged society, then may cause a lot of problem in terms of social cohesion or social inclusion. So I also ask, is it common pattern in across country you examine, or is it a unique case for Korea? In relating to that kind of finding, I'd like to know about the role of a higher education institution in promoting lifelong learning. As Korean Statistic Authority suggests, we have great shortage of students who graduate high school. That means we have a lot of vacancy in college and university in future. So some experts suggest we may find new market from adult learning, right? So, but some experts are pessimistic about that kind of try, but some are positive. So I wonder if you know any kind of good case in that higher education institution like college and university play a greater role in promoting lifelong learning. So I'd like to know that kind of 3 points. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Well, seems like the higher education in urban area is likely to go up because of this population problem, I guess. But okay, now I will open the microphone to the floor, and following the previous way, that I'll collect questions 3 in a row, and then let the presenters to respond, and then go on until time allows. Well, this is already 2:20. We have to start our coffee break or health break, but pardon me to enter into your precious coffee time a little bit. Questions? Raise your hand, please. No questions? Okay. One gentleman over there, and any other questions from the floor? Okay, then you go first.
예, 충주 여중에 근무하는 김성국입니다. 제가 이 발표한 걸 들었는데요. 교육을 마치 스킬이나 어떤 통계, 어떤 거기에 너무 위주로만 되는 것 같습니다. 스킬이라는 것도 한계가 있습니다. 예를 들어서 인성이나 감성이나 그런 쪽이 다 포함된 게 아니면 이렇게 수치화시킬 수가 없다고 봅니다. 이건 지금 현재 교육의 가장 큰 문제점이라고 저는 보는데 좀 더 교육의 질이나 내용 쪽에서 실질적인 토론이 이어졌으면 좋고요. 그 실질적으로 내용을 질을 높일 수 있는 방향이 뭔지를 그런 거에 대해서 좀 한마디 듣고 싶습니다.
네, 고맙습니다. OECD 작업이 아주 본질을 때리는 질문 같습니다. 다른 질문, any more questions? Yes.
저는 고등학교 직업교육 고등학교 교장입니다. OECD 결과를 가지고 OECD 국가가 되려면 전문대 이상의 학력을 가져야 된다는 OECD 결과를 가지고 대한민국 교육 정책이 바뀌었는데 그게 긍정적으로 변한 게 아니라 고학력 시대가 이제 창출이 됐는데 고학력을 시키면서도 능력이 오히려 더 떨어지는 그런 인력을 많이 배출했다는 평가를 받고 있고 실질적으로는 이제 중등 단계 직업 교육이 황폐화되는 그런 결과를 좀 심하게 표현했습니다만은 이제 그 사실이 그때 그 결과를 이제 우리 정부에서 어떻게 이제 접목을 한 것이 잘못된 건지 아니면 그 결과 자체가 잘못된 건지에 대한 평가는 제가 잘 모르겠습니다만은 거기에 대한 말씀을 한번 좀 듣고 싶고 저희는 이제 지금 이제 그런 직업 교육 정책이 저번 정부에서 마이스터 고등학교를 선도적으로 해서 고졸 취업의 이제 신화가 좀 이루어졌거든요. 그러니까 지금 그러한 고졸 취업, 고졸 능력으로도 앞으로의 세대를 살 수 있는 어떤 그러한 결과들이 만들어지고 있는 그 모습들을 조금 더 이제 좀 더 심화시켜서 좀 실질 아까 어떤 선생님이 질문했던 그런 내용처럼 좀 질적인 측면에서 정말 살아가는데 이 정도만 실력을 가지고도 직업교육을 받아도 삶에 사는데 행복하다고 하는 그런 결과들이 지금 한국의 마이스터 고등학교 결과로 해서 이제 이렇게 도출되고 있는 부분들인데 그런 부분들에 정말 실질적인 교육력의 평가가 이루어져서 중등 단계 직업교육과 고등 단계 직업교육이 이렇게 좀 단계별로 꼭 필요한 대로 이렇게 이루어질 수 있는 그러한 어떤 결과를 좀 도출해 주셔서 각 정부에서도 참 이렇게 활용할 수 있는 기회가 좀 만들어지면 좋겠다는 생각을 해보고 조금 아까 말씀하셨던 것처럼 이렇게 세대별 격차가 생긴다고 말씀하셨는데 과연 거기에 대한 대응 방안들이 대응이 어떤 것들인지에 대한 그런 답변도 좀 듣고 싶고요. 현재 OECD 정책을 연구하면서 아마 저희 대한민국의 직업교육을 중등단계 직업교육을 충분히 연구하셨을 텐데 그 연구에 대해서 어떻게 생각하시는지에 대한 질문도 좀 듣고 싶습니다.
네,
이상입니다.
네, 교수님 고맙습니다. 어떤 질문의 어떤 내용들은 아마 OECD 오신 분들이 답하기 적절하지 않을 수도 있고 해서 제가 답할 수 있는 권한을 최영섭 박사 크립에서 있으니까 정책을 만들고 있으니까 부탁드리고 또 배상원 교수도 과거에 교육부에서 정책을 만들었으니까 그쪽으로 답을 하도록 해도 될지 모르겠습니다. 다른 분 질문 없으십니까? 예, 하얀 넥타이 매신 분.
First of all, really thank you for the wonderful presentation. And I am a senior student of Hanguk Academy of Foreign Studies. And as you have mentioned in your presentation, the educational level of science or mathematics of Korea ranks almost in the highest level among the OECD countries according to the PISA test. But when they researched about the educational interest that the students have within themselves, for especially science, they ranked in the lowest level among the OECD countries. So I wanted to ask about what would be a great way to balance both the educational level itself and the educational interest of the students, so the students of Korea would not only have a great level of education, but they would also have more interest and more spirit to learn more about science and mathematics and other subjects as well. Thank you.
예, 고맙습니다. Thank you. Well, we have three questioners, but more questions from them. Before I ask the Deborah and Mio to respond, let me correct just one thing. because I know it, because I was working at the OECD delegation. There was no regulation or rule or standard to become an OECD member country to have at least vocational education graded level of whatever something. That's a kind of misinformation, I'm afraid. Okay, well, Deborah, you have 3 minutes to respond freely.
Thank you very much, and it's a very challenging set of questions. We'll try to respond. First of all, to underline and agree wholeheartedly that the real challenge really is how to connect the development of skills with the effective utilization of skills. And in fact, what we can see from the survey results is some quite different patterns across countries. Some where the development of skills is very strong, but the utilization of skills not so effective. Others where the development of skills is not so strong, but the utilization is very effective. And then we can actually see some cases where, in fact, neither is working terribly well. So it's quite an interesting pattern of contrasts. One of the things that we would underline again and again and again is that the whole point of this is to get better economic and social outcomes for individuals and for societies. And that can only be achieved by getting every one of those 3 pillars working most effectively. So it's really, how to go for the best possible outcomes and focus on those. In terms of the role of higher education in promoting lifelong learning, I think we can see across OECD countries that some institutions, some higher education institutions are reinventing themselves, that they're offering a much wider range of services for a much wider age groups, that there's a huge potential for higher education institutions to be providing lifelong learning, but there have to be the conditions that foster that, the incentives and the return to individuals if they actually undertake lifelong learning, and the opportunities for them to do so. One of the questions from the floor was looking at, do we focus too much on the wrong things? We are only focusing on a very limited set of skills: literacy, numeracy, and problem solving, and in the case of PISA, science. There's much more to life than that, and there's much more to skill sets than that, both technical skills and also the sort of emotional traits, personality, perseverance, teamwork, those generic skills. We wholeheartedly agree that those skills are very, very important. However, what all our analysis of PISA and from the survey of adult skills shows is that these foundation skills are extremely important. So that, if these skills aren't right, then it's very difficult for adults to succeed in their lives and for economies to succeed. So they're very, very important. I can see that there's a card flashing to end, so perhaps I'll stop at that point to leave a little time for others to comment.
Thank you. Thank you, Deborah. And Mio, you want to respond?
Okay, maybe I'll be selective. Okay, I'll be selective due to the time limit, and I'd like to respond to the last question from the floor about the quality education with the non-cognitive the capacities. In addition to what Deborah already mentioned, I'd like to mention about the importance of early learning, because in Korea, I can see the academic stress already starts in early learning. But brain neurological science shows that the peaks of the non-cognitive development takes place before the age of 4. So there are a lot for children to learn about peer interactions and so on. So let the children be children is one of the lessons for Korea as well. And also, it's not only the school system itself, but also the existence of Hagwon actually has some negative impact on this as well. And also, beyond the school, the university entrance exam is actually influencing how the school education is organized too. So we need to tackle this issue, not only just looking at the curriculum of the school, but more holistically. Okay.
Thank you, Mio. And Dr. Choi, as a member of the broader policymaking group, to have something to respond to the questions from the floor, like, well, in Korea, education is just reduced to skills and numbers and figures, and some other criticisms from the floor about the Korean education policy making. Okay, you can freely respond to that.
Well, 시간을 줄이기 위해서 이제 한국말로 하겠습니다. 우선 중등단계 직업교육 관련해서 중등단계 직업교육을 활성화해야 된다라고 하는 부분에 대해서는 저희도 이제 동감을 합니다. 그러나 중등단계의 직업교육 활성화 자체가 목적은 아니다라고 하는 것을 분명히 해야 된다. 다시 말해서 청년들에게 다양한 삶의 경로에 대한 다양한 가능성의 제공이라는 차원에서 중등단계 직업교육이 이제 직업교육의 활성화가 추가가 돼야 된다라고 하는 것을 말씀드리고, 그다음에 교육의 이제 질에 대한 고려에 대해서는 저희도 당연히 그러하다라고 생각을 합니다. 그러나 보셨겠지만 이 OECD 스킬 스트래티지 리뷰는 그 스킬의 개발, 그다음에 활용, 액티베이션 이렇게 다양한 영역을 이제 넘나들고 있습니다. 그래서 그러니까 교육의 문제를 교육 자체만이 아니라 교육 이후에 어떻게 노동시장에 나가서 일을 하고 하는 것까지 포괄하는 것으로 좀 더 확장된 관점에서 한국 교육 시스템을 접근을 했으면 한다라는 것을 말씀드리고, 그것이 우리 아이들에게 보다 좋은 고용의 기회를 늘리는 데 기여할 것이다. 이참에 한 가지만 말씀드리면, 우리 사회에서 청년 실업 문제는 유럽보다 외국보다 훨씬 더 심각한 사회 문제일 수 있다. 무슨 얘기냐면, 우리 사회는 한 번 동년배들 사이에서 그 일자리를 잡을 기회를 잊어버리면 영원히 일자리를 잃어버리게 될 가능성이 굉장히 크다. 일본도 마찬가지고, 유럽은 나이에 대해서 그렇게 엄격하지 않기 때문에 한 번 이제 대학을 졸업하고 일자리를 못 갔더라도 나중에 일자리를 잡을 기회가 있지만, 한국 같은 경우 그렇지 못하죠. 그래서 이 청년기 동안에 어떻게 제대로 된 프로페셔널 캐리어를 설계하도록 할 것이며, 제대로 된 교육 훈련을 제공할 것이며, 그리고 또 이들이 제대로 노동시장에 정착하도록 할 것인가, 이것이 외국에서보다 훨씬 더 큰 사회적인 의미를 가진다라고 생각을 합니다. 그것을 위한 많은 의견과 토론이 있었으면 좋겠습니다. 이상입니다.
고맙습니다. 조 박사님, 배 교수님 좀 더 부연해서 설명해 주시죠.
네, 아까 교장 선생님 말씀드린 거 관련해서 사회자께서 말씀했지만 OECD의 recommendation이 한국이 반드시 따라서 한 거는 아닌 것 같고요. 고등교육이 팽창한 건 사실인데, 그거는 초창기에는 맨파워 플래닝 해가지고 우리 이코노미 인더스트리 보고 학력 수준을 높이자 했지만, 그 뒤로는 우리가 얘기할 때 사회적 수요라는 건데, 고등학교 졸업하고 추가적인 교육을 받고자 하는 게 있는데, 사람들이 알게 모르게 교육력이 높아지면 임플로이어블하고 굉장히 성공할 수 있다는 믿음이 있기 때문에 간 것인데, 아까 점심 먹으면서 데보라 선생님하고 이 얘기 저 얘기 나눴는데, OECD도 이게 strongly recommend 한다는 게 아니고 너희 나라의 컨텍스트에 맞게, 너희 나라의 히스토리에 맞게, 너희 나라의 환경에 맞게 정책을 개발하는 게 중요하다, 이런 말씀을 하신 거고, 다만 OECD는 여러 가지 다른 나라와의 관계에서 우리나라가 어떤 위치에 갔는지를 보여주기 때문에 굉장히 great work이라고 저는 생각이 들고요. 또 하나는 굉장히 중등 단계 직업 교육이 중요하냐, 고등교육까지 가냐보다는 이제 이슈는 lifelong learning 같아요. 계속 어떻게 배우고 느끼고 할 것이냐. 그게 우리나라가 점점, 이제 우리 다 80까지 살잖아요. 이제 80까지 살아야 되는데, 대개 60대면은 이제 학업을 놓거나 할 때 이제 우리는 앞으로 더 관심을 많이 둘러야 될 게 평생 직업 능력, 인생 2모작, 3모작 갈 때 중등 단계 직업 교육을 성공리에 맞췄어도 라이프롱 러닝 어떻게 가야 되고 그랬을 때 아마 OECD에서 얘기한 것은 그 3필라 특히 그 competency 스킬들이 굉장히 important하다라고 얘기한 거고 그게 시사해 주는 바가 많고 그것들을 중등 단계에서도 잘 가리키는 것도 굉장히 중요해요. 왜냐하면 파운데이션이 중요하기 때문에 저는 그렇게 생각합니다.
네, 배 교수님 고맙습니다. 그러면 마지막으로 is there any more questions from the floor for the last moment? If you don't, let me add some my own comments about this. That I'll speak in Korean. 우리 다 알죠. 피사 하면 우리나라 15세 학생들이 세계 최고입니다. 핀란드, 뭐 영연방 나라 몇 개, 그다음에 동아시아, 일본 뭐 해가지고 15세는 세계 최고예요. 2000년 이후 10년간 아주 입증을 했는데 이번에 어른들 재보니까 이런 결과가 나왔습니다. 근데 이제 OECD 분들은 걱정 없다. 지금 한국 어른들 16세에서 24세 고원전이는 지금 굉장히 좋고 20년 후에는 그들이 이제 올라갈 테니까 50대로 좋을 것이다. 저는 반대로 봅니다. 저희 지금 2000년에 시작한 피사에서 우리가 탑이지만 만약에 피사를 1980년에 했어도 우리가 탑이었을 거예요. 지금 이 순간 40대 50대가 80년대에 15세였을 때 받은 교육 결과 탑이었을 텐데 지금 이게 가라앉은 거예요. 그래서 성인의 직업 교육 훈련, 포멀, 인포멀, 언잡 혹은 뭐 아웃 오브 잡 뭐든지 간에 성인들의 직업 능력 그 형성되고 발전하는 과정에 심각한 문제가 있다고 저는 보는데 지금 이제 배 교수 얘기한 것처럼 100세까지 사는데 이렇게 디테리에이팅 되는 퀄리티의 라이프롱 러닝 시스템을 가지고 우리가 버티겠는가? 학생들은 잘하지만 직장에 가서 20년, 30년 지나고 나면은 OECD 스탠다드에서 바닥 내지는 중간밖에 안 되는 현실인데 이게 뒤집어질 거냐? 연구하고 지나봐야 알겠습니다만은 제가 보기에 이번에 이 글로벌 HR 포럼에서 OECD 데이터를 봐서 소개하고 우리 사회에 임팩트를 주는 거는 바로 거기에 있다는 걸로 생각합니다. 15세는 잘하지만 어른이 되고 40세, 50세 되면은 we are not sure. 그겁니다. 그래서 여러분들 다른 질문이 없으시면은 제가 무례하게도 15분 커피 타임을 제가 뺐었습니다. 양해해 주시고요. Thank you for all your attention and thank you for hard working from OECD staffs and also to professors. Thank you. Thanks so much.